It was much like her first day of school as Bronwyn showed Annika the way to her new workplace. Over the door of the mustard-yellow house with the white picket fence and wild sprawling fruit orchard surrounding it was a sign that read Orchard. Bronwyn knocked on the door, and they were greeted by the orchard caretaker Denise, who was a rather voluptuous middle-aged woman. After Bronwyn left them, Denise brought Annika to the apple trees and handed her a basket. "I suppose you're wondering why I haven't gotten any little ones to help me out here." I guess?" In truth, it hadn't crossed Annika's mind. She assumed Denise must have children old enough to be in school, or even to have a more interesting job than apple picking. An apple dropped onto Annika's head, making a thumping noise, though Denise didn't seem to notice. Annika looked up at the rustling in the tree and the scurrying of a red squirrel. "Well, I'm not as fruitful as I seem, I suppose." It seemed Denise had been waiting quite some time to get a chance to crack that joke. She started picking apples, which she then tenderly placed in a wicker basket. Annika picked up one of the baskets and followed suit. She grabbed an apple and pulled and twisted and shook until it came off. Denise gave her a strange look. Never picked apples before, eh?" Denise smiled and came over to Annika, picking up a few apples that had fallen because of Annika's violent apple-picking method. "Not all the apples are ready, my dear. If they resist, you leave them where they are. There is nothing to be gained from picking an apple before it's ripe. All you have to do is twist, and if it doesn't come free, well, then go on to another better apple." While they worked at filling the baskets, Denise was a fountain of chatter. Annika listened smilingly to tales of people she'd never met, unsure of how much she was expected to remember later. "Robert Sr., that's the forester, he likes to talk at you, about how things ought to be, and how terrible the world is, but don't you worry about him, he's a harmless sod. Then there's his daughter, with her 3 young uns running around causing trouble all the time. To think she's the only one with that many little ones these days. After the way she started, you have to give her credit. Or rather, I suppose it's the rest of us that are behind. Well, maybe only I am. The fields, well, that's some kind of bad luck, with one after the other, the little ones growing up and leaving, and there's only one left. Mind you, she's a real good kid. If you stick around, I'm sure you two will become good friends. You must be around the same age." "And it's too late for me now. Even if I wanted to have little ones of my own, I mean. We'll just have to hope someone wants to take care of the orchard, or well, I suppose some might have to care for 2 houses if the kids keep leaving. It just seems so lonely to think of it. The orchard is my home. It should be lived in when I'm gone, but that's just how I feel. You know, I ain't ever given much thought to what it's good for, this place. But with them leaving the way they do, I wonder if we're behind the times. Robert, he'll tell you otherwise. That's Robert Sr. He thinks we're the answer to all the world's problems. Well, I say to him, you need to know the problem to answer it. And that man couldn't possibly know anything about the world." Denise seemed overwhelmed with her own thoughts, and this produced a silence in which Annika could breathe, though not for long. "But sometimes I wonder whether the families'd be having more children if the carpenters built a few more homes," Denise continued. "Old Cecil'd rather do repairs than start a new project. Still, maybe that's well enough. It would be a shame to let any houses stand empty, and there's a chance that just might happen." Denise was quiet for some time afterwards. Annika could tell Denise felt guilty for not having children, but she couldn't understand why. These worries were too different from her world for her to really know how to empathize. The husbandry are all right. They're a little over-friendly, but somehow too good to spend time with the rest of us, preferring the company of animals. Well, I suppose we all have our occupational hazards. Mine seems to be too much sugar," Denise said, patting her rather round figure. "Everyone around here fulfills their roles, more or less. We ain't got no troublemakers, though you'll get quite a different story from Robert." Denise's train of thought was interrupted by the yoo-hoos of her mother coming out into the orchard looking for them. "Over here, Ma!" Denise shouted. Her mother came waddling with a big wicker basket. She placed it on the ground, and Denise went to help with unpacking the contents. Soon the 3 generations of women had a picnic in place. They dined on sandwiches and blackcurrant juice, with blackberry tarts for dessert. "Oh dear, ain't this a treat! Seeing you and sweet little Annika in the orchard reminded me of my younger days, when there were so many of us out here." Denise's mother got nostalgic. "She's been a big help, and it's so good to have a companion," Denise told her mother, and she truly meant it. Together they packed up the picnic, and Denise's mother waddled away with the basket. As the old woman faded behind the trees, Denise turned to face Annika. "This place, do you like it? It's a good place to be, eh?" She looked Annika in the eyes when she asked, though she didn't wait for an answer, and began to pick apples while continuing. "I can tell, even though I've never left. I know it don't get much better than this. After all, Cecil Carpenter, he's the smartest man in town, and he travels the world learning lots, but you know, he came back. That means it's a good place. It needs to be better to live right here in our little world than to be a part of that big world with all its war and greed." Diane had another period of silence. This time she seemed worried by Annika's silence, as if she was hoping for confirmation from her, or any kind of reaction really. Annika tried to think her own thoughts as she worked, but Denise's constant interruptions brought Annika more and more into this strange new world of people she had never met, names she had never heard of, worries she had never had. She found it partly irritating and partly calming to be taken so far away from what she knew. "But there must be troublemakers here sometimes, people who are greedy and take more than they deserve," Annika blurted. Diane seemed puzzled by the question, but responded to the best of her abilities. "Troublemakers. Well, I suppose it's troublesome to cheat a person to their face, and while everything is done here face to face, it would be pretty difficult. But you're right, this ain't a perfect world. People are flawed everywhere. We've had a few bad apples, but I'm proud to say we got rid of the last one 16 years ago, and it's all been just fine since then," Denise said, almost defensively. "What kind of bad apple was that?" Annika asked. "Well, you are a morbid one, eh? But that's all right. I don't mind telling. It's all in the past now. You see, some men think they can treat their wives however they please, and that just ain't so. Though I'm sorry to say she put up with it for the sake of their son for almost a year. Not that I can't see why, but I'd rather have a father who's gone than a father who beats my mother," Denise explained, and seemed to want another silence. "But how do you get rid of someone? Is there a kind of policing or law here?" Annika felt she wasn't understanding this place at all. "Well, no written law, as such, but when the people providing you with your daily needs start to hate you, you very soon feel a need to leave. But you know, even without that fact, I really don't think many people here could take it. We need love and acceptance as much as we need water or sleep. Anyways, you could say it's a natural democracy we got. Sometimes it works, sometimes it don't, but our little town is still growing strong, so it seems to work all right for now, eh?" So Denise said, but Annika wasn't sure you could truthfully say a town like this was going strong. It was barely a town. Annika turned away and thought to herself it was rather eerie how people were so dependent on each other's approval. She felt it should make her safe to be here, in a place without the corruption of money, and yet all she could think of was her fear of becoming a social outcast. Annika kept on picking apples, climbing into one of the trees with some difficulty, and sitting surrounded by apples and leaves. The wind gently rustled through the leaves, a reminder that she could fall to the ground if she didn't keep it together. Remembering that you're not a leaf, and you can't let yourself fall, nor a bird, and you can't let yourself fly. Remembering what you are, a human stuck between heaven and hell, that's what's important, Annika thought to herself, and though she wasn't sure what was so important about it, it felt right to imagine herself at a threshold between two worlds. It was one of those moments when her thoughts seemed to draw inspiration from something she hadn't thought, but maybe she had read somewhere, and now used that inspiration to make a simple concept seem extraordinarily important. A strange attempt at romanticizing a feeling that led her feeling rather self-conscious and silly for having thought it at all. She distracted herself by singing amongst the apples, the humming feeling in her chest calming her. Sweaty despite the chilly air, Annika was relieved when Denise called to say it was time to head inside. Climbing down from the apple tree carefully, Annika felt heavy when her feet touched the ground again. Denise came with a cart in which they loaded the baskets and brought them to the house. When all the baskets were collected, Denise patted Annika on the back. "Cheers to a job well done. You did real good, Annika. Let's take about half to put in the cellar and half to make cider, eh? There are more apples that still need picking, but they're not going anywhere." Denise and Annika filled some wooden barrels with apples and carefully brought them into the cellar by the road. Annika had thought earlier when she first saw it that the cellar was a house that had sunk into the ground, and well, that did seem to be the idea. They went back into the house and recruited Denise's father's help, forming an assembly line to prepare the apples for the cider press. Annika was beginning to feel tired, and the rest of the day turned into a blur of repetitive motions. Denise seemed to be tired too, since she hadn't spoken much after entering the house. The silence was broken when Denise's mother rang a bell to announce dinner was ready. The Orchards and Annika sat at the table and ate and drank together. There was plenty of chatter at the dinner table, but Annika was unable to keep up with the listening. The Orchards teased her for drifting off at the dinner table and sent her home for the day. On her way back to the inn, rolling the cart containing barrels full of apple cider Denise and she had pressed, Annika thought about things. This felt markedly different from whatever her brain had been doing most of the day. Earlier it seemed as though her mind had been doing some kind of insecurity dance, thinking about how she disliked this place and yet how she liked it, and how she disliked herself and yet how she disliked others. Behind a friendly smile she had felt embarrassed, worried, weak, and now in the silence walking alone, she simply felt calm. Annika noticed smoke beginning to rise from the inn. She breathed deeply, enjoying the smell of wood burning and watching the lavender sky filling with smoke, and suddenly she felt light despite how tired her body was. Annika went inside the inn, and the innkeeper, what was his name again? She thought to herself, pouring her another cider, and she sat drinking it while watching the baby sleeping. It was so small and squirmy and clean looking. As she sat there with her body becoming heavy again, Annika was almost falling asleep as Bronwyn walked in with her energetic smile and bits of bark on her apron. "You must have been working hard today, dear. How would you like a bath?" "If it's not an inconvenience." Annika lit up at the thought of soaking in a tub. "Not at all. When it's ready I'll come get you. So why don't you take a little nap in your room first? It'll be about half an hour." "I could use a nap." Annika smiled. She lay in the bed and let thoughts turn into dreams under a purple and graying sky. Annika drifted back to a reality which was now moonlit, when Bronwyn knocked on the door and asked her to join in the bath. There was the sound of laughter and voices coming from outside, and Annika stretched out to wake up her body. Heavy eyes and a heavy head grew lighter as she woke. As she walked down the stairs, Bronwyn came to greet her. "Oh, Annika dear, you seem so tired, so I let the others bathe first. Drink some water and we'll head over. They should be done soon." She smiled, and Annika gratefully sat down at the bar in the haze of the candlelit evening. When the time came, Annika followed Bronwyn down and through the kitchen to behind the house. It really smelt of smoke now, and there was the wooden building from which the smoke had been coming earlier, though it seemed to have stopped. Upon entering, Annika found it wasn't quite what she had expected. The room was full of towels and clothes. Bronwyn began to undress. "We're bathing together? And with others?" Annika asked, fearing she might sound silly. "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot you might be used to bathing differently." Bronwyn looked apologetically at Annika, who then began to undress. The others were slowly disappearing into a dark room. Bronwyn passed Annika a towel, with which she covered herself gratefully, and they went toward a door from which some of the others had begun to emerge. "So the way it works is we sit in here for a while before bathing ourselves, because it helps to open the pores," Bronwyn explained, as they waited for those inside to finish exiting. Amongst the people leaving was a boy around Annika's age, with glistening wet hair and freckled skin. Annika blushed profusely, but no one seemed to notice, since she was now in a dark room lit only by a fireplace thing. Bronwyn led her to sit down, and Annika absent-mindedly wondered where the bath was, as she sat in the heat collecting herself. Bronwyn then splashed some water onto the fireplace, which seemed a rather strange thing to do, since it filled the room with searing hot steam. After sitting some time, boiling and sweating, Annika was about to ask when they would take a bath, but Bronwyn got up and poured some water out of a barrel onto herself this time. "So, Annika, you scoop the water onto you and wash away the sweat," Bronwyn explained. Just as Annika thought she had understood, Bronwyn took a bunch of leaves from a pail of water and hit herself with them. "The leaves release a nice smell and help energize your skin." Bronwyn smiled at Annika's puzzled face. A wrinkly and very naked woman came into the room. Bronwyn introduced Annika to the woman, Brooke, who was apparently Wayne's mother. "There's nothing better to end the day than a sauna, eh?" Brooke said after taking a seat. Annika wondered if she'd be another small talker like Denise. "Oh, but Brooke, our guest never stepped foot in a sauna before today, so we'll have to go easy on her." Bronwyn smiled brightly and gestured to Annika to join her at the water. "The water is the best part," she assured her. Bronwyn and Brooke seemed to agree on many things, and they both had a kindness about them that meant the warmth of the sauna was coupled with the warmth of their company. Annika, after having seen how Bronwyn did it, splashed some water on herself, only to find it was shockingly cold. Every nerve in her body seemed to have been reset, wide awake. She continued with the best of bathing quickly, flinching when the time came to pour water on herself again. As Annika washed herself, she noticed there was something strange in the sauna. "What's this?" Annika asked, pointing at a wooden contraption that was connected to a pail of water. "Ah, Midori's toy. Seems an awful lot of work to make that complicated thing, but she's quite different from her father in that way. Where Cecil only repairs, Midori only creates strange new things," Brooke told Annika, wiping some sweat from her forehead and neck. "But what does it do?" she asked. "It's for pouring water on the rocks without having to get up." Bronwyn smiled and gave a demonstration. From where she sat, Bronwyn pulled the lever and the bucket traveled over to the rocks, splashing some water and returning while the steam filled the air. Annika smiled. It was a little thing, but it seemed rather magical and out of place. She wondered what the inventor might be like. She sounded like an accepted rebel, which seemed something of a contradiction. The two women got up to leave the sauna almost simultaneously, and Annika followed suit. Unsure whether it was habit or a special bond, Annika watched them with interest and a tinge of envy. The three women wrapped themselves in their towels and sat outside, steam coming off their bodies as they passed the bottle around. Drinking the cool cider, Annika thought she had never been so relaxed in her life. Sitting there, they feasted on apples, bread, and salted meat before going back into the sauna to sweat once more. Half asleep from the food and heat, Annika wandered back to her room, while the other women remained for another round in the sauna. Annika went back to her room and sat at her desk, her body still full of warmth. She could still hear the faint sound of women's laughter as she took out her journal and, after carefully jotting down the date in the upper right-hand corner, wrote down one line. "I have settled down at the hamlet in the forest where everything is so very strange to me that I couldn't possibly have imagined it." Smiling slightly, because it all felt so real now that she had written it down, Annika looked out the window where the shadow of trees were waving in the wind. She suddenly grew colder and watched the shadows worriedly. Being alone with her thoughts meant she let herself feel, and what she felt most of all now was fear. She brought her candle to bed and got under the covers. She sat in bed and somehow tears began to fall from her eyes. She let it all out. She blew out the candle and heard a scratching noise, though she was too tired to be scared any more. It was just a moth she saw. She watched it crawling on the window until she drifted off into a deep sleep full of easily forgotten dreams.